Mysterious swarms of bees, fire in the sky, global conflicts, earthquakes, dangers from the depths of the sea. These are terrifying Nostradamus predictions for 2026. We pray don't come true. Nostradamus has a line in Book 1, Quatrain 26, where he mentions a great swarm of bees rising up and causing chaos. Nostradamus didn't really write long paragraphs. He wrote quatrains, which are just short little 4-line poems. Super cryptic, but there are some eerie similarities in the writing to current events. So, this mysterious swarm of bees. Highly doubt he was literally talking about bees. Now look at what's been happening lately though with drones and AI. We're seeing way more stories about drone swarms popping up, airports getting shut down because of it, military bases scrambling jets because dozens of these tiny flying objects showed up on radar, and police departments reporting clusters of unidentified drones flying in formation at night. Then you've got the robot side of things. Companies like Boston Dynamics and Tesla keep showing off their humanoid bots, and they look less like prototypes every year. Tesla's Optimus robots were literally shown doing basic factory tasks on their own in early 2025. So looking at Nostradamus talking about a swarm overwhelming cities, this does feel eerily fitting. Another one of his most talked about lines is where he writes about the sky burning at 45 degrees. If we take this one more literally, we could look at how insane Earth's temperatures have gotten. In 2023, 24, and 25, we saw heat records break over and over, especially around the 45-degree latitude line, which cuts right through places like Italy, the US, Pacific Northwest, parts of China. People online have taken that sky-burning line and connected to everything from heat domes to solar storms. NASA actually confirmed that the sun entered a peak activity cycle in 2025, which does increase the chances of strong solar flares, the kind that can mess with satellites and power grids. One massive solar blast could knock out communications at the exact moment the world is already struggling to cool down. A new conflict brews. In this quatrain, Nostradamus talks about two major powers drifting toward a massive clash, nations pulled into the chaos, whether they want it or not. And yeah, nobody has to reach very far to connect that to what's happening today. Tensions between the US and China haven't slowed down at all. Russia's situation that I cannot discuss in detail on YouTube is still ongoing. India's rise has changed the balance of power in Asia, and smaller countries keep getting caught in the middle, especially around the South China Sea. What spooks people out about this prediction is how it lines up with recent military reports. NATO has openly said that 2026 to 2032 is the period they're worried about the most when it comes to potential global conflict. Add in rising military spending, constant cyber attacks, and all kinds of crazy experimental drones flying through the air for who knows what reason, and the world is feeling like a pretty scary place. This next prediction talks about a powerful northern figure losing influence. For years, people associated it with different rulers, but recently it keeps getting tied to Russia because of how unstable the country has become. Tensions are bubbling up no matter how tightly the government tries to control the narrative. Their military has taken heavy losses, and a lot of intelligence analysts, not random bloggers but actual researchers, have said Russia could hit a breaking point depending on how the situation evolves. Nostradamus describing a fall doesn't necessarily mean death. It could be a change in power. The timeline lines up with actual predictions from political scientists who say the next 2 years are going to be extremely unpredictable for Russia. Nostradamus wasn't specific, but the idea of a northern leader facing a sudden downfall does seem to fit the current situation a little too well. Next on the list, we have two giants collide. In this one, Nostradamus describes two massive forces clashing, with smaller nations scrambling to protect themselves. People love connecting this to the idea of alliances, not just countries going to war alone, but entire blocs lining up behind them. When you look at what's been happening around NATO, BRICS, and how the West and East are slowly pulling away from each other when it comes to money, trade, and who they work with, this one suddenly feels way more relevant than it used to. It's kind of scary how fast things are changing. BRICS expanded for the first time in years. NATO accepted new members. Countries that used to be neutral are picking sides for the first time in decades. Even without a major war, tension around the world right now is palpable. Trade disputes, fights over rare minerals, cyber attacks. It's not all tanks and missiles anymore. A lot of people think Nostradamus was describing a kind of conflict that doesn't need a battlefield to be dangerous, a modern form of warfare. And unfortunately, it seems to be lining up a little too much with where the world seems to be heading in 2026 and beyond. Nostradamus wrote about a, quote, very great famine through pestiferous wave. For a long time, people shrugged this off because global food production kept increasing, but that confidence has dropped in the past few years. We've had droughts in the US, crop losses in Europe, flooding in Asia, and rising fertilizer costs. The World Food Program said in 2025 and 2026, it could be extremely tough for food access in certain regions because weather patterns have just gotten so unpredictable. On top of that, conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East have disrupted shipments of grain. Even countries that don't normally worry about shortages are starting to feel the pressure. Prices went up worldwide between 2022 and 2024, and many haven't dropped back down. Multiple harvest seasons get hit back to back. The world could easily see shortages and price spikes at the same time. Nostradamus also mentions the sea turning bad, fish dying, and sickness spreading along the coast. For hundreds of years, people assumed this was probably a metaphor, but in more recent years, the conversation's shifted because this is exactly what's happening in certain parts of the world. Toxic algae blooms have been killing fish in Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Mediterranean. Japan's water release from Fukushima created a huge debate about ocean health. Some coastal regions in South America have already seen tons of fish dying off. Combine all that with rising ocean temperatures, which are literally the highest ever recorded, and scientists are genuinely worried about underwater ecosystems dying out. In terms of how things will play out going forward, well, multiple research groups are saying the next 2 to 3 years will basically decide if parts of the ocean bounce back or just keep getting worse. It's not an overnight thing, but the idea of coastlines struggling with contamination, dead zones, and declining fish populations, that is already happening. From the depths, a ruler will rise, empires will fall, and new waves will reign. The aquatic empire from the realm of the ocean, end quote. Really seems like Nostradamus is entering into Aquaman territory with this one, explicitly talking about something rising from the ocean. It could be a metaphor, but with the mention of waves and an actual aquatic empire, I don't know, it seems kind of hard to read that figuratively. So what could he have meant? Well, one way to look at it, strange things are literally coming out of the water. There have been reports over the last few years of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, emerging or entering into the ocean. One of the most famous is the 2019 USS Omaha sighting, where Navy personnel recorded a spherical object coming out of the water near San Diego, hovering for a bit and then disappearing. Incidents like that are rare, but they do happen, and it is becoming more common. Nostradamus wrote about earthquakes a lot, and people are linking some of his warnings to what we've been seeing lately. Seismologists have been warning about the Cascadia subduction zone off the Pacific Northwest. It's been quiet for hundreds of years, though, so what's the big deal? Well, that's actually kind of the problem. It's overdue. Japan has had continuous aftershock cycles. Turkey's 2023 earthquake was a reminder that even in places built to handle disasters, you can never fully prepare for how violent and deadly nature can be. Scientists are especially keeping an eye on the next few years because certain areas are at a higher risk, like those along the Ring of Fire. That's the chain of volcanoes and fault lines stretching around the edges of the Pacific Ocean, from Japan down to Indonesia, across to Alaska, and all the way to Chile. It doesn't mean a huge quake will definitely hit in 2026, but researchers say the odds in these zones are higher than usual. Not to mention, we've also had a rise in smaller quakes happening in places that normally don't get them, like parts of Europe and the central US. This one feels like Nostradamus accidentally predicted climate change without even knowing what climate was. He wrote about unbearable heat and people fleeing areas that used to be safe and livable. Already sounds pretty familiar. The last few summers were the hottest on record. Countries like Greece, Canada, Spain, and Algeria all saw brutal fires. US cities like Phoenix hit temperatures that used to be unheard of. Climate scientists said 2025 and 2026 could be transitional years. Either we stabilize some of the damage, or we hit a long-term warm cycle that's going to change everything. Farming to where people can live. It's not some fantasy scenario. Cities are already talking about heat migration plans, cooling zones, because their infrastructure just isn't built for this. But with all that said, I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.